What started as a Venezuelan prison gang is now fast spreading across the United States.
It's an infestation. It's taking hold, not just in Colorado or New York. It's up in Michigan, Florida, Texas, you name it.
They've expanded through tactics of extreme violence and trafficking everything from guns to people. You might already be familiar with them because a video clip of the gang went viral recently. They made national headlines for terrorizing an apartment complex in the state of Colorado. Take a look at this insane security footage showing our men casually walking around like they own the place. We see them going from door to door, and according to an independent investigation from a Denver law firm, they were demanding protection money, basically extra rent paid directly to them, and they're stabbing residents who refuse to pay up. The reason why I think this footage was so shocking to so many people is because the criminals look like they're going for a stroll without a care in the world. The question on everyone's mind, or at least mine, is how are they operating with this kind of impunity? It suggests that these guys are comfortable and don't have any real fear of repercussion from law enforcement. So who is this new gang?
Tren De Aragua.
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 Now I know this topic has become widely politicized, but I assure you it's not my goal to sway you one way or the other on it. I worked closely with a South American researcher to make sure that we got all of the facts and cultural idiosyncrasies about this case correct. I'm simply going to be consolidating all the information here for you. This is everything you need to know about the TDA gang and authorities' attempts to bring them to justice. But first, I'm excited to tell you about the folks that made this video possible, Conflict of Nations, probably the most realistic and action-packed PvP strategy game around. And what's even better, it's completely free. Every time I log into the game, I get lost in its sheer immense detail of the maps and artillery. You can choose a real country to lead into World War III and fight up to 128 other players in real-time gameplay. I love that you can build your own army from the ground up using tanks, jets, nuclear submarines, and all kinds of other military assets. With multiple strategies to choose from, you can forge alliances with other players or declare war on your neighbors. It's all up to you. And right now, Conflict of Nations is offering you an exclusive gift. Just click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is only available for 30 days, so don't wait. Click the link in the description or the pinned comment below. So the origins of Tren De Aragua are widely disputed, but one theory is that they started in Venezuela around 2005 as this small group of workers who got jobs at a railway union, but the union never ended up progressing into the construction phase. So instead they started going around pulling off crimes together, idle hands of the devil's playground and all that. I believe this theory to be the most credible and obvious because their name literally translates to Aragua train. Things really kicked off though when some of the members were thrown into an overcrowded prison. Venezuelan authorities who were in charge of that facility then handed over the keys to the prisoners themselves to run it instead. Through a series of neglect, cowardice, and good old-fashioned corruption, they pushed the responsibility onto the prisoners. A few years later, things really had gotten wildly out of hand because according to Inside Crime, who's been closely monitoring the group, by 2018 the gang had over 2,000 members and was growing fast. Local criminal organizations tried to confront Tren De Aragua, but were killed in the process. A year later, Venezuela's Special Action Forces, they're like elite police officers, got into a firefight with them during a pursuit and killed 5 of the members. But so far, they've failed to really put a dent into their operations. The gang ran the prison themselves through a system called Pranatos, which, I kid you not, roughly translates to natural-born double killer prisoner. You cannot make this shit up. These groups then established a structured system within the prison, which I'm sure had a fun bureaucracy to it, where the top boss was called a prawn, appointed lieutenants to collect the money needed to run the prison, coordinate crimes outside the wire, and charge the inmates a tax to allow them to live. Yes, you heard that right. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact same thing they were doing in Colorado. A former prisoner told the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, "The first time you don't pay, they shoot your wrist. If you don't pay a second time, they shoot your ankle. The third non-payment, the penalty is death." When the Venezuelan National Guard were later ordered to retake control of the prisons, what they found, I think, it shocked me. One of the prisons had a zoo, a playground, a swimming pool, a nightclub, and a restaurant and a bar. They had underground tunnels that allowed the leadership to come and go out of the prison as they pleased. Rana Rosique is a Venezuelan journalist who specializes in security issues there, and she said the prison was a kind of small town or city where they were a kind of mayor or rulers who controlled everything. They turned the prison into a kind of bunker and turned it into a kind of city where there was a swimming pool, where there was a disco, and where there were restaurants, a zoo that was very impressive. Meet Guerrero. He's the top leader, top dog of Tren De Aragua. This guy's origin story legitimately reads like something out of a supervillain comic book. Hector Guerrero Flores is 40 years old. He was born in 1983 in the city of Maracay, which is the capital of the state of Aragua in Venezuela. In the year 2000, he broke his crime cherry with some robberies, and then in 2005, he graduated to murder by attacking a police station and killing Corporal Oswald Gonzalez there. 5 years later, he was captured for selling illicit substances. This is where he was put into the Aragua Penitentiary Center. At this time, his TDA gang was still small, according to the BBC, but under his leadership, it exploded in membership. He escaped and was caught again when rumors claimed that Venezuelan President Maduro even requested his help in suppressing protests, although that might have just been a rumor that he wanted to facilitate himself. General Oscar Aurelio, director of investigations for the Peruvian police, said that Don Hector is so bloodthirsty and has so much contempt for life. In 2018, he was sentenced to 17 years in prison for murder and drug trafficking. Wow, that's a pretty low sentence here. I mean, in the US, I think you'd get a lot more for that, no? In 2023, he escaped with 500 other prisoners. After the outbreak, authorities found hundreds of thousands of small arms rounds, anti-tank munitions, C4 explosives, and even rocket-propelled grenades inside the prison. Not your regular everyday shanks. It took 11,000 Venezuelan security forces to retake control of the prison. That's like 2 brigades. If you're getting frustrated hearing about the bad guys getting away with shit, don't worry. Later in the episode, we get into the SWAT teams kicking in the doors and taking names. The kind of stuff that makes me hooah really hard all over the place. It sounds like these guys had it 10 times better than me with their zoos and arsenal of weaponry, so why in the world would they ever want to leave? It all ties back to the collapse of Venezuela, and I'll power through this part quickly as a recap if you're not aware, but during the early 2000s, oil prices were booming, shooting up to the moon, $18 per barrel to $140 a barrel. But when prices took a nosedive starting in 2008, Venezuela's economy absolutely tanked. They resorted to printing money, which caused massive inflation. To really condense this all, they had nasty food shortages, people were broke, hungry, and this triggered mass migration starting in 2012, and by 2018 had led to 3 million Venezuelans leaving their country. Now, the TDA gang saw decreased revenue during this time, and so it's when they started to leave for new markets by expanding throughout Latin America and the United States. And here's where I'll say, I personally feel like the mainstream media fails to cover this topic in any way or do it justice. That does, at least in any way that doesn't incite division. Because there are thousands of Venezuelan people out there who hate Tren De Aragua. They hate them because they give them a bad name. I don't think it's racist for me to say that this gang needs to be stopped. But on the other hand, there's also complete denial by some in the media that this is even happening at all, because Nuance has been dead most of my adult life. The reason this is concerning is because we've seen what happens when gangs are allowed to grow unchecked in places like Mexico, El Salvador, and Ecuador that are dealing with this same problem today.
TDA is characterized as MS-13 on steroids.
Law enforcement agencies are finally starting to fight back now. In October 2024, Texas officials raided an apartment complex in San Antonio, arresting 20 members of Tren De Aragua gang. They had actually taken control of a vacant apartment building. This appears to be their preferred MO, right? That I've seen where they'll come in, they'll take over a hotel or an apartment with fear and violence, and then they run narcotics and trafficking operations out of it until they get rolled up by law enforcement. In 2022, there was this hacktivist group that breached into the email servers of Colombia's Prosecutor General's office, and it revealed 7 million emails that detailed how the counter-narcotics authorities were keeping tabs on TDA. The emails revealed how the gang saw in the mass exodus from their country a unique opportunity for them to expand their operations. So in the process, we saw the gangs infiltrate alongside the migrant flows, establishing cells in neighboring countries like Peru, Chile, and the United States, which were some of the first destinations of Venezuelans who were trying to rebuild their lives.
The new warning from law enforcement that among the record number of migrants that have crossed into the U.S. are members of a Venezuelan street gang.
Historically speaking, this is very similar to how cartels and crime families of many countries establish roots. Organized crime's nothing new in the United States. According to the FBI, there's over 33,000 violent gangs spread across the country, and there's over 1 million members in those gangs. The National Gang Center states that over the past 25 years, gangs have become prevalent in over 30% of the US jurisdictions. Heck, my grandfather used to always tell me stories about how he had distant connections to the Italian mafia in Brooklyn through my cousin Saul Vinny or whoever. But how is Tren De Aragua any different from those crime families? What sets them apart? To better understand, my producer Armando and I reached out to the former field office director for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, John Fabricator, who served 26 years as a federal agent. I wanted him to explain it to me Barney style.
Can you tell me about the way this particular gang, Tren De Aragua, and how they differentiate themselves from other kinds of gangs?
So Tren De Aragua probably started coming in a little over 3 years ago. We started seeing some trends and some information that they were entering the United States. And they've pretty much gone to every major city that we have in the U.S. at this time and started to set up their networks. And the level of their violence, especially with extortion and assaults, is a lot higher than some of these other gangs has been as well. A lot of these gangs try to stay under the radar from law enforcement. Tren De Aragua, El Tren, does not seem to be wanting to do that. They don't care that law enforcement knows that they're around. And in fact, the head of Tren De Aragua recently released a green light on police officers to allow its gang members to shoot at police officers. So that's something that would not normally happen.
So it's believed TDA first started appearing in American cities in Chicago in 2023, and then just a year later, they were already linked to the murder of a Florida police officer and a 22-year-old nurse student from Georgia. And that's what sets them apart. They are brazen. They're taking out police officers when other gangs try to lay low. From there, we began seeing the gang's influence crop up in multiple states. It was clear that this wasn't an isolated problem. It was spreading. I should tell you that after the apartment incident in Herrera, Colorado, it got very controversial. The police department and the mayor later put out a statement that this was just an isolated incident. Residents from the building also held a press conference saying that they've never seen Tren De Aragua around and they aren't scared of them. Meanwhile, interviews with other citizens who live there say the exact opposite. Either way, I still think that it's worth investigating gangs deeper, because an FBI threat assessment found that criminal gangs commit as much as 80% of the crime in many communities. FBI agent John Morales warned that TDA was operating in all 5 of New York City's boroughs where they recruited from people staying in migrant shelters. Morales said the main concern that the FBI has right now is that TDA will start to form an alliance with other gangs like MS-13 and other pre-existing gangs in order to spread drugs more effectively and to make more of a profit. NYPD put out a bulletin stating, Tren De Aragua's newly established presence in New York City may incite further gang-related violence, including stabbings, assaults, robberies, raising public safety concerns, end quote. An incident went viral and gained national attention. I remember when this happened, 2 NYPD officers were attacked, brutally beaten, and kicked. They were responding to a call of disorderly conduct in Times Square. They tried to de-escalate the scene, but were attacked by roughly 14 members of the TDA gang. The thing that frustrates me the most is that I actually can't even show you the video clip showing the violence that the gang did to these cops, so you can actually feel what happened. Because YouTube, I saw they would take it down and demonetize it, even though all of the news channels are able to show it. Fortunately, I'm now on Pepperbox TV, where you can see this episode with that video uncensored, along with exclusive Pepperbox TV videos that I'm creating there, analyzing combat footage. I put the link in the description if you're interested in that. So ultimately, 7 of the attackers were arrested, but it gets even worse because they were all released instantly without bail. And this is, of course, this caused even more shock from the public, who questioned why the gang members were not immediately deported. A familiar pattern has emerged here. In one particularly terrible attack, a TDA gang member on a moped dragged a 62-year-old woman down a street in Brooklyn. Their MO is to snatch your phone or your purse right out of your hand, and then they drain your entire bank account of any funds by using fake transactions on your phone to the United States and South America. Then they send your phone off to Colombia to be resold. I'll tell you some instances of those violent attacks now. A 33-year-old man who made the mistake of working with the gang was abducted alongside his 2 kids in Texas. They put a single bullet into the back of his head, execution style, and then they dumped his body on the side of the road. Once their initial cells were established in the States, they muscled their way into local criminal economies. How? They would send a message to anyone who got in their way. Their favorite method was their trademark move, delivering a rival gang member's dismembered body inside trash bags to the competition's doorstep. Also, 2 NYPD officers were shot by TDA gang members in Queens, New York. One of them only survived because his bulletproof vest stopped the shot. So the way TDA is breaking into these drug markets is by being more violent than the rest. Like how a business needs to somehow differentiate themselves from the competition, that differentiating factor for TDA is that they attempt to be more ruthless than everyone else. They tied up an innocent woman and then threatened to cut off her fingers. They pistol whipped her and stole $75,000 in jewelry from her. They were all later rounded up and arrested. Here is where it gets a little bit murky though. On the one hand, organizations like the think tank Inside Crime, which back in April 2024 claimed that the group appears to have no substantial US presence and that information about the presence of Tren De Aragua in the United States is limited and vague, but just 5 months later, officials from Texas, Chicago, Ohio, Colorado, and Florida say that they're seeing the complete opposite. In fact, the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, which moves quicker than the TDA, recently classified them as a transnational criminal organization. They state on their website that the gang is expanding throughout the Western Hemisphere and engaging in diverse criminal activities, posing a threat to American communities and abusing the U.S. financial system. The problem is that tracking of TDA's activities has been obscured by the debate over sanctuary city-states, a heavily politicized topic which has led to a lack of communications between jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies across the US. Personally, to me, it's frustrating to see our safety be politicized when I would think that this would be the kind of issue that we could all get behind and cooperate on for our own sake. To quote an example, an anonymous source in the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement told the New York Post that sanctuary states and cities don't share any information with immigration authorities, which means that local police department arrests don't lead to detainers from ICE, which in turn do not lead to data being compiled about the true scope of TDA, whether it is small or big. Other jurisdictions look like they're having a split personality disorder case, like a municipality in Colorado, which attempted to diminish the presence of the gang only to afterwards confirm that they've been arresting members for months. It's this politicization that makes tackling the problem even more difficult. Other police departments like the NYPD have been taking the threat more seriously. The NYPD Deputy Commissioner announced the opening of an international liaison post in Bogota to investigate the gang's operations against intelligence gathered by Customs and Border Protection. An investigation by Homeland Security confirmed there are over 1,000 TDA members operating within the United States, which might not sound like a lot until we consider the fact that in many cases 5% of the people are responsible for committing 50% of the crime. While conducting research on the gang, I wasn't surprised to see that many New Yorkers are taking the threat seriously. I lived in New York City for like 10 years, and when it comes to safety, this city does not mess around. At least for many years, they cracked down on that kind of madness. For example, take a look at this advice given to YouTube creator Nick Shirley, who was kind enough to allow us to use this clip. He had a straightforward suggestion by a nightcrawler from the city.
Be careful. There's a lot of robberies on the streets. Just give them your stuff and walk away. It's not worth it. These guys are dangerous. They will slice you up. I've personally seen them slice people up. I've seen them beat people senseless. They're dangerous, and I'm a born New Yorker. I grew up in the mob days, right? And even mobs, the mob didn't do what these guys are doing.
Remember the official who called TDA MS-13 on steroids? That's because Tren De Aragua's calling card is violence. They post graphic videos on social media showing victims begging before being executed. For example, the Wall Street Journal published a short that I think is very telling exchange between Anthony Salisbury, a top Homeland Security official, who got a call from a Texas official who just asked, "Hey, have you heard of Tren De Aragua?" And Salisbury responded, "Please, don't tell me you've seen them." But we're not defenseless. When the US labels you as a foreign terrorist organization, or FTO, that's just the modern way to say that the US government has taken the gloves off. This is because any individual identified as a member of an FTO is automatically inadmissible, deportable, and ineligible for various immigration benefits, meaning they won't be safe even in sanctuary cities. If a TDA member is detained or arrested, ICE requests must be honored because federal law related to terrorism override any local authority. The only problem is you can't arrest them if you can't find them. Fortunately, like MS-13, TDA members literally brand themselves with tattoos all over their body and are now well known by the authorities. It's gotten so bad that TDA is asking young new members not to get these tattoos. Law enforcement is fighting back by already arresting 4 high-profile leadership for extradition back to the United States. And the US State Department raised the reward for their top leader of Tren De Aragua, who escaped, to $12 million.
Can you tell me about the chronology between when you first heard of them and when you started to get alarmed or to consider them a serious threat?
What scares me is that we have a lot of gangs that are already established here in the United States who are going to start feeling that pressure that the gang's putting on them to overtake some territories, and we're going to see more violence. It may be more gang-on-gang violence, but as you know, when we are dealing with gang-on-gang violence, there's always innocent people that get caught in the middle.
A lot of people don't know this. I'm going to open up for a second here, but throughout my 20s when I was a younger man, I struggled with drug addiction badly. After I got back from Iraq, I was looking to fill some purpose in my life, and I filled it with drugs. I've seen firsthand the kind of destruction that these substances bring not just to users, but also their families and friends. That's one of the reasons why I have such a personal interest in national security issues that concern gangs that facilitate these kind of drug sales. I think TDA is a small part of a much larger problem of gang activity around the country. They might be the newest gang to put roots down inside the US, but they're following an existing playbook that other gangs have found success with. The concerning thing to me is how brazen, public, and violent they are. And tomorrow, Saturday the 9th, I'll be on the Unsubscribed podcast, where I drink Rippets and White Claws for several hours until I start saying what I really think about the war in Israel and Palestine. And thanks again to Conflict of Nations, the free online PvP strategy game, and their exclusive gift for you. Make sure you hit the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Just